Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 57 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Now, just last week, in episode 56, I was with Max Egan, and it was outrageously early on the Tuesday morning for Max as we went live from the UK at 7:30 on the Monday evening. And we were discussing the outrageous agenda being perpetrated by Israel, and in fact the Zionists effectively hiding behind the people and the nation of Israel to perpetrate their genocide on the peoples of the greater Israel and beyond. And we talked about how, with the refugees stroke migrants being forced into Europe, it was actually setting up the perfect storm. And who could have believed that within a week, that perfect storm would be unleashed in Europe? So, needless to say, the topic of tonight's discussion is not just about Paris and its broader implications, but also about the growing significance of the alternative media. Because it's becoming very apparent that the establishment are becoming, understandably, increasingly concerned about the power and the influence of the alternative media and the speed with which we are able to get a message out beneath their radar. And already we are seeing certain websites effectively being shut down or blocked by browsers with messages stating that the content contains unsuitable material and that they are being redirected to a more suitable website. Well, my guest tonight was actually participating in a discussion with UK Column earlier today, the UK Column News, and I would encourage you to watch that discussion, and you can find that discussion on the UK Column website, ukcolumn.org. There was a discussion between Mike Robinson, Vanessa Beeley, and my guest tonight, Patrick Henningsen. So, Patrick, I know it's across 2 days for you because you actually did that discussion at circa around midnight, I think, your time. And so now, hopefully, you're refreshed. You had a good sleep. And of course, everything surrounding the Paris incident is still unfolding. So what's your, with your fresh set of eyes this bright Monday morning there in Arizona, what's your take on things?
Well, it's as I predicted on Friday night. I went on television Friday night to give on-the-minute commentary of what I thought was going on. And I said that when Monday comes, it's going to be an absolute full-on orgy of fear porn, speculation, loads of people tabling various ideas about how to deal with the grave threat of ISIS and everything from biometric real ID, mandatory ID cards, to the cancellation of freedom of movement between European countries, to bombing Syria, one of the France or one of the NATO countries bombing Syria, and that's more or less exactly what's happened. So, I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot to figure out what the agenda is going to be when you've seen these events happen before. You can kind of very easily predict how the political machine or how the state and the media will react and what sort of talking points they'll be floating. And today there is an all-out full court press. I mean, all the major networks are just on this, really putting pressure right now, on the president to deploy more ground troops into Syria. That's not going to happen right now, of course, but they're putting a lot of pressure on. So this is being used to sort of create a divide within the United States in the run-up to the 2016 election. So it's actually really good timing for polarizing a lot of voters on this issue. But I don't know how sustainable it is because, as you rightly pointed out in your introductory monologue, Ian, that people are waking up really fast to this. And what we've seen with a lot of these types of events, what clearly look like Operation Gladio type events used to manipulate public opinion through domestic terrorist attacks, that the effect of them keeps getting shorter and shorter. And then this one, unless there's a follow-up attack, this is really going to be falling off very quickly from Thursday. Okay, so the effect of it. I mean, this is the reality of living in the 21st century in our digital the waterfall, the endless waterfall of digital media and news and commentary is that this event, the fear of it, the spectacle of it, will fall off very quickly. In fact, by I predict by midweek, unless there's a follow-up terrorist attack, and then it'll sustain itself. So for maybe another week,
But that's
So
almost what they got to do now, isn't it? They've almost got to literally keep the pressure on, and so in fact, another event is not beyond the realms of probability because, as you rightly say, by the middle of the week, all those survivors will have gone through their phones, and I'm sure that what will come about is photographs and video footage that was actually taken either at the time that these events were unfolding or immediately afterwards. And I'm sure there will be some very, very interesting footage to emerge. So, I mean, on the basis, I remember after 9/11, there was literally about 24 of us around the world, I think, at that time. I mean, probably more, but there was 24 that I think we were aware of each other who were, looking at the events and, trying to rifle through the information that was in the public domain. But today, I mean, it's like probably hundreds of thousands of people across the world, are right now trawling through everything that's in the public domain, looking for the anomalies, whether it's in commentary, whether it's in video footage that's been put out by the mainstream, and one way or another, the intellectual power that is being put into that task will bring the lie to the fore sooner rather than later. I mean, the classic, of course, with Charlie Hebdo, I mean, the one that absolutely nailed it. I mean, it was almost a single frame, wasn't it? But it was the alleged terrorist shooting the police officer who was laying on the ground in the head and claiming that that was the headshot that killed him when it was, pretty clear that if anything, was fired, it was a little more than something that created a little bit of dust on the pavement. And then, of course, you work back from that. And then once you actually know that something doesn't stack up, then obviously you're looking for more supporting evidence. But I mean, I have to say that as this was unfolding, I was actually sitting, watching a movie at the time with my youngest son. And, we were just talking about it. And I said, let's just bide our time. Let's just see what happens. Because I said, if it turns out that an exercise was running earlier in the day, then I think we can pretty much assume that this was a staged event. And guess what?
Yeah, a drill, multi-agency drill, including EMT personnel, police, multiple branches of those agencies as well, in a large coordinated citywide terrorist emergency drill. And one of the heroes, if you will, of the Charlie Hebdo attacks was one of the first responders on the team because, lo and behold, he was participating in this drill. And the way the mainstream media covers this is quite amusing, is what they say is, wow, isn't that fortunate that we were having this drill, that we had all these assets on location, and we were able to react that much quicker because of the drill we had. And this is the way that they say, and the media doesn't really question that. So the mainstream media is very important in this whole setup because they're the sort of shepherds of the narrative. They're the gatekeepers of what the story will be. And in a way, if you look at the sort of intellectual terrorism that really is now part and parcel with any of these sort of domestic terrorist events, the mainstream media is running point. They're really like the maestros. They're the ringmasters of this sort of intellectual terrorism. So right now, Francois Hollande has said that they're wanting to alter the French Constitution to extend the state of emergency. So it's initially a 12-day period, but they've already pushed that forward to 3 months because they said, I quote, the French people have a right to a safe Christmas time. Okay, so basically CNN is pressuring. I saw Chris Cuomo, who's an absolute incredible media operative for CNN. He's the son of Governor Mario Cuomo from New York, and brother, I believe, of Andrew Cuomo, who's also the governor. So he's from a political dynasty. He works for CNN. He is one of the most flippant news anchors. They flew him out to Paris along with the whole CNN staff to just stand there and park in the central square and just talk and just regurgitate talking points in a circular manner for about 5 straight days. So Chris Cuomo interviews the head of the Labour Party, not the head, but one of the MPs, I believe, of Francois Hollande's Labour Party, and he says, well, are you what about security? What about the rights? You need to insinuating that the Constitution, it's good to alter the Constitution. And this MP rightly comes out and says, no, this is not something that the French people want. We're a republic. We're not a dictatorship. And he was pushing back on her. And then this morning he was doing it again with with a very prominent French journalist who spoke very eloquent English, said that we need to find the balance between liberty and security is a really important issue for the French people. And again, Chris Cuomo was pressuring him to say that, well, that's not, almost like that's not good enough. You need to put security before liberty, imposing this kind of American intellectual militarized terrorism on the French people. And so CNN is really skilled at this, and really pushing the war agenda really insidiously with every single segment. And so this is also going on at the high levels of the French government and also the French media. So no one even bothering wanting to question anything. The bar is so low in terms of proof with these mass shootings or domestic terror events that you require no evidence other than circumstantial and speculation to determine who the culprit is. So you have all these bombers, allegedly. You have all these shooters, allegedly. They've automatically said it's ISIS. France launched airstrikes last night, airstrikes that dubiously probably didn't hit any targets with any ISIS operatives in them. They were supplied by the U.S., the targets. The U.S. has been flying over there for a year and a half. How can they all of a sudden have all these high-level targets available for the French on a silver salva last night? And then the French make this glorious.
Yeah, because in all probability, the US gave them targets that were part of Assad's forces. Yeah, but what I'm saying is they probably gave them targets that were actually Assad's forces. Because, I mean, I think that it's becoming increasingly evident that the US has not been attacking ISIS. I mean, as we've discussed, on previous episodes, but the US has been actually aiding ISIS because the US agenda is to get rid of Assad.
Yeah. No. Eventually, if you have what you said, it would definitely probably be correct down the road if this continues. And what you said is that the U.S. would be giving Syrian Arab Army, quote Assad targets to the French or to coalition partners to bomb and airstrikes. Basically, that hasn't happened last night in Raqqa. This was an area where the Syrian Arab Army aren't that well positioned or in that region. So, but what they do is they give a lot of valueless targets. They call them high value targets, but it's just for show, basically. But down the road, this is the big danger, and obviously this is what the Russians or the Syrians would be afraid of, is that they would use a no-fly zone or increased coalition or NATO presence in there to basically hit Syrian military targets and say, "Oh, we're sorry about that. We didn't mean to do that. We wiped out 200 of your soldiers there and a few neighborhoods to boot, maybe a hospital. Oh, we're sorry. That's just collateral damage. We thought we had ISIS targets." That's exactly what happened in Afghanistan last month. They flattened a Doctors Without Border hospital.
Yeah,
and didn't even apologize for it. In fact, we're in denial for most of the week after that. So this shows you the sort of vacuum of ethics and morals and any level of accountability or responsibility that the United States and its so-called coalition partners have when it comes to the issue of collateral damage. But it was all for show, basically, and it was because the dialectic has been set. CNN, the BBC, everybody's managing the same Hegelian dialectic, which is that Europe has porous borders and we have a refugee crisis, we have a migrant crisis, and the Syrian terrorists have snuck through using this migrant wave as cover. And look what they've done. They've gone and done this mass terror attack. So it's a perfect problem reaction solution. The only problem is on this the logical solution that the average person on the street might be craving for is to seal the borders of Europe, and that is physically impossible. In fact, European borders have never been sealed. Europe cannot close its borders since the beginning of civilization. So the only then logical outlet left is to bomb, just to vent anger. And it's exactly what France did last night. This was a political move. It was for show. It was to, they even admitted on, one person admitted on television today, to appease the people who were upset about this terrorist attack. I mean, this is the world we're living in right now.
But the reality is, Patrick, surely most people can see that right now, we've got a massive refugee stroke migrant issue in Europe. And what this is doing is it's creating, by bombing in Syria, it is creating the perfect opportunity to launch similar type attacks right across the whole of Europe.
Yeah,
to literally turn Europe into a fire zone.
Well, I had a guest on my show yesterday, Gerard Coleman, and he put it very eloquently. He said this is the West, or the Anglo-Americans, using the product of their aggressive globalization, using that as an excuse to step up the aggressive globalization. So they've caused the so-called migrant crisis by military interventions and clandestine operations in Syria and Libya. Okay. And these are some of the main drivers, and Afghanistan and Iraq. These are some of the main drivers of the migrant crisis. So they're using now the result of the problem they started, the NATO members led by the United States, next by Britain and France. Okay, a problem they've been fueling, they've been funding. France has sent cash and weapons to armed militants in Syria from 2012. That is even in The Guardian, okay? So if you want to go by the official narrative, which is the kind of dumbed down narrative that this is blowback from ISIS in France, that's like an acceptable narrative for Guardian readers, for instance, okay? Or people who read The Independent, well-meaning liberal people, university educated. Oh, this is, if they won't go any farther in the conspiracy realm, is no farther than say this is blowback from France giving cash and weapons to ISIS militants since as early as 2012, or moderate rebels, or whatever you want to call them, the ubiquitous rebel alliance, right? But the reality is this: it's more than that. It's not just blowback, because we are working part and parcel, our countries, the Western countries, part and parcel with these armed insurgency groups. Okay, this isn't just blowback. So we have people in intelligence agencies. We have embedded people in those groups. All of them.
Patrick, we have discussed on previous episodes with yourself, with Ken O'Keefe, with Max Egan, and we have shown the evidence that ISIS is a UK, Israel, US construct. Israel treats ISIS wounded. It'll bomb the bejesus out of Gaza and the West Bank, and just leave the collateral to its fate. But it has been actively treating the wounded of ISIS, and the only way that Israel is going to do that is if it's got a vested interest in ISIS.
Yeah, and Israel's also been giving air cover to al-Nusra and ISIS fighters by hitting Hezbollah militias who are helping the Syrian Arab army basically to root out the terrorist menace in their own country. So Israel's hitting Hezbollah targets. They're hitting Syrian Arab army military targets for the last 3 years. They've done this on like 8 or 9 occasions, documented. Nobody raises any alarm about that. No UN Security Council censures. No rants from Ban Ki-moon, who's an absolute U.S. puppet in the UN. So Israel is up to its neck in it. Turkey is drowning in it. Okay, it's way above their head. They are the main facilitators of the insurgency, all of them, in Syria. and they're a NATO member country. So, Turkey, Jordan, United States, Israel, Britain, France, this international, transnational cooperation between all of their intelligence agencies and their militaries to basically destroy the nation state of Syria. So this has been going on now, according to WikiLeaks, since 2006. Okay, so there's no to try to deny that and try to paint the Syrian conflict as a civil war, or to say that it's a product of the Arab Spring. Yada yada. These are nice canned sort of safe little narratives that people like certain columnists who I won't mention from major daily newspapers like to punt out in this kind of righteous fashion, or BBC news anchors. They're still sticking to the fiction. So we have a parallel reality. We have the fiction that the mainstream media runs with, that our political elites also riff off of, and then we have what's really happening. And so it's like a parallel two tracks of reality. One is consensus reality. That's for the mainstream media and the political minions and bagmen. And then you have the truth. And so most people are now choosing to go onto the truth track because it actually makes sense. There's some logical and critical analysis that seems to make sense. The problem with what's this thing in Paris and in Syria, it doesn't make any sense. They're tripping over their shoelaces right now because they have weaved such a extravagant web of lies for the last few years, and it just doesn't even add up. They don't even know. They can't even decide what to call ISIS. One day it's ISIL, the other day it's IS, the other day it's ISIS, the other day it's the Islamic State. Okay, they can't even decide what to name it. That shows you how bogus the whole boogeyman
and the other thing,
is.
of course, that people seem to conveniently ignore is like all the kit, all the Toyota trucks, all of the armaments. I mean, I checked out on eBay and Amazon, and it's a little bit difficult to get RPGs and AK-47s. I can't find the page where you order them. No,
Sure.
So obviously, somebody is making sure that these guys are extremely well equipped.
Well, they've just done a major bust, and again, we saw this in the immediate wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. There was this huge, massive terror raids across France and Belgium back in January. The identical thing happened today and yesterday, and so they trace it back to Belgium, to the Molenbeek neighborhood, this neighborhood full of unemployed Muslim youths where all these terror cells are. This is just like down the road from NATO headquarters, right? And from the EU in Brussels. So they're painting Brussels as this sort of terror enclave where they plan and stage all these attacks. And of course, they find rocket launchers, weapons in one of these apartments. So there might be a weapon stash. More than likely, it's to do with NATO intelligence. So how can they all of a sudden swoop down and make all these arrests and busts overnight? And they say they've been surveilling them for over a year, and yet, et cetera. And the gunmen have been under surveillance too by the security state. And they just, snap their fingers and go in and make all the arrests and all this other stuff and seize all these weapons. And they say, well, Brussels is a real hub of weapons trafficking, and this is a big problem, especially with these Islamic terror cells. And so, and we're meant as the public to sort of swallow this and say, oh yeah, of course that makes perfect sense. We need to do something about the terror problem in Brussels, Belgium. Ooh, they're a real cauldron of terrorist activity. That's where NATO is based. Okay, so Operation Gladio was a NATO intelligence operation. Nobody has ever gotten life in prison for slaughtering innocent European people through Operation Gladio. So we can only assume logically that type of operation is still a go. It's still live.
Absolutely. And of course, Gladio was basically using the extremists, either extreme left or extreme right, and obviously being manipulated by the Machiavellian scriptwriters. Well, so I think you're probably very much on the mark here. So let's consider the hypothesis. And I'm sure this is something that will be panned out over the next few days. The London bombings, one of the hypotheses, in fact, it's a hypothesis that actually seems to stack up to some extent, is that the 4 alleged perpetrators were actually on the security service payroll, and they actually thought they were going to be participating in an exercise. And we know an exercise was going on that day, of course, thanks to Peter Power of Visor Consultants. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that Peter Power was directly involved. In fact, I suspect that Peter Power and Visor Consultants were there to provide the cover, so that if anything really went south, they could claim it was just part of the exercise. But it got beyond that, and I think Peter Power went on the ITV at 5 o'clock, Radio 5 Live at 5:20, because he realised that he was providing the cover, and he needed to cover his butt and get his story out there before anybody else did. So he gave us the intel that there was an exercise rolling out that day. The perpetrators make it to London. We know that they certainly didn't catch the train that they were alleged to have caught, and that's why the British government has only ever come up with a half-baked narrative that doesn't stack up to examination, because there's no way that the perpetrators could have got from Luton Station to King's Cross in time to catch the underground train that exploded at Edgware Road. So the perpetrators, realising they'd been set up, made their way to Canary Wharf, the home of the London-based newspapers. And in fact, there's a Sheffield-based academic who has actually written a paper, which I think can be found on one of the pay-per-copy websites. And the title of that paper, it's very snappy, it says, "What Really Happened at Canary Wharf on the Morning of 7/7." And what he presents is the evidence, and the evidence actually is stacks up to examination much more than the official narrative. And the evidence is that the perpetrators made their way to Canary Wharf and were assassinated at Canary Wharf. And obviously, you have to make sure there's no loose ends. And of course, this is exactly what happened after the Madrid bombings, where allegedly the perpetrators were chased into an apartment, which then they created a fake explosion and then claimed that the perpetrators were all dead. And here we have the same thing again in Paris, where all of the perpetrators are allegedly dead,
except one allegedly at large, but that's debatable as well. They flashed his picture and his ID on the screen and said, "Do not approach this person; they're dangerous." So you can read that two ways. That's either a death sentence for that person who's probably working. And if we go by the 7/7 hypothesis, which you've just laid out, which is very cogent, if we go by that hypothesis, then the ID of the person, Abdel al-Salam, I think his name is, I'm not sure, but he's a young French national, then he's a dead man walking who was basically taking part in a drill, or he's an asset of the security services, and this is just part of the gag, basically, is to have him on the run, and then he'll be declared dead in a shootout at a warehouse somewhere in the countryside or so forth. So, I mean, he won't be set upon by an army of vigilantes, I can guarantee that. That's not how they're going to sort of write that particular character off the script. So, but again, and we see the post-humanist characterization, dehumanization, assassination of all these so-called radicalized youths. They even put up the dates on television and saying, this is this guy, his name is Ishmael something or other, and he was radicalized in 2010, according to the security services files. So they have files on all these people, and they know the date which they were radicalized. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So this reminds me of Finsbury Park Mosque a little bit, with the sort of Abu Hamza operation that they were running there for a number of years, and using Abu Hamza as the sort of mascot for radical terror for the tabloid papers, with the hook, hand like that, the cleric from Egypt, who probably, I think, lost his hand in a building accident or something. I'm not sure if it was any combat in Afghanistan, but that's debatable. But he's been written off. He was used for a period of time as a sort of character to be the focus of public angst against Islamic people and Islamic terror within the midst of Britain. So he performed his duty for 15 years, and then he was shipped off, and who knows where he is now. He's probably not in prison. More than likely, he'll probably be sitting in his bungalow in Morocco or something like that by now. I don't know how long he's going to actually be in a U.S. federal prison, but it's so again, this more of the same, basically. So we have a new character, a new mastermind who's emerged from the Paris bombings. I cannot even pronounce his name, but he's the same one they wheeled out after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. He's got a beard, posing with the ISIS flag. You know, these pictures are fantastic. It's almost like team photos, really brilliant. You know, well made up and everything like that. It was kind of ridiculous, but people believe it. People
they wrote the
some people
backstory.
still believe it.
They wrote the backstory. That's why they know these dates so well, because they wrote the script. So, you know, I mean, they've got it down to an absolute fine art. And obviously, the individuals themselves are then supposed to remember that script.
Yeah, and they make all these loose connections. Oh, he traveled to Greece and he escaped the dragnet on that day, and we believe he's definitely made contact with Akbar al-Baghdadi, the spiritual leader of ISIS, and so forth. So it's just this kind of endless stream of characters and part-time extras that are just cycled through the news and just slotted into any of these events afterwards. And there's very little follow-up on any of the even the gunmen. I mean, what happened after Charlie Hebdo? The Black Widow, the girlfriend of Ahmad Kulabali, her name was Hayat Humadin or something like that, and she was all over the news, and they're saying she's at large, and we don't know. And they spent 3 or 4 days tracking her on the TV screen, right? And she's probably made her way into Syria to be with ISIS, and that was the end of that. The world's most wanted woman ever, right? Mata Hari. To the 10th, and they just drop it like a bad habit after about 4 days, and you never hear from it again. So she was the handler, probably, of her boyfriend, Ahmed Kulabali, and like the White Widow was the handler of Jermaine Lindsay, and she's probably an intelligence asset from one country or another. Who knows? It doesn't necessarily have to be, if you're British, you don't necessarily have to be an asset of the British intelligence. You could be a CIA asset. You could be a French intelligence asset. There's a lot of bleed over now. It's just kind of a confab in inter-nation cooperation.
But there's also the rogue elements. I mean, you know, within CIA, MI6.
Well, those rogue elements are part of organized crime syndicates.
Absolutely.
And there's a major gray area that a lot of people don't like to admit there, but it's true that our intelligence agencies will often partner with organized crime, hitmen, assassins, drug dealers, cartel members, whatever, people who steal things, embezzle things. They partner with them for deniability. So there's 2 or 3 layers of deniability. This is normal that this done in the shadows, basically. Then you have corporate security. Then you have mercenary firms. Then you have professional soldiers, private investigators, all of these sort of people, different agencies, very high-profile agencies that are employed by investment banks to investigate or to tail people or to blackmail people, working for law firms. Okay, then they're also working contracted by security services or a rogue department within the security services that no one's supposed to know about, so that it's completely deniable. This is the world of spooks, smoke and mirrors, and we as lay people don't get a look in on this, but there's plenty of people in government that know that these sort of operations exist, and a lot of these things are above the law, Ian. So it's with the Official Secrets Act, on top of the covert aspect, on top of the subcontracting. How are you ever going to be able to track who is responsible for what? Then you throw in the international angle to it, and you know whether it's the American, the Israeli, or the British, or the French, and it's almost impossiple to get any justice, even if you knew that it was a quote inside job.
I know it's incredibly. I mean, it makes Kafka look transparent. You know, Hey, well, listen, there was a couple of, I think, really interesting headlines over the weekend. And here's the first one. The most ruthless death cult in history. You know what? I absolutely concur. It is. What we're dealing with is, without any shadow of doubt, the most ruthless death cult in history. It's a lot more subtle, as it were, than the Inquisition or the conquistadors. But nonetheless, I mean, this death cult is single-minded, and in fact, that single-mindedness was spelt out by none other than Barack Obama when he made this observation. And how true this is, an attack on all humanity, because whomever is orchestrating this is human in form only. And even that may be an overstatement, because everything that's being perpetrated on humanity here is not human. I mean, this is the thing that, of course, people can't get their heads around. The fact that there are Kafka-esque scriptwriters, the likes we've just been talking about, who, could probably take a leaf out of Pablo Escobar's book. I mean, if you look at Escobar and the way he manipulated, not just Colombia, but, the whole of Central America and indeed much of the US and the Food and Drug Administration and the CIA. And this is straight out of his playbook. And the challenge now for humanity is basically who can win the PR war. Because this is now about getting the versions of events into the mass psyche. And obviously, the mainstream has the likes of Murdoch, and Murdoch in particular, of course. Murdoch is the prime mover here. He owns so much of the global media. But the other end of the spectrum is the alternative media. So, Patrick, there's no question. The alternative media, in my opinion, has never been more crucial to the future, to safeguarding the future of humanity than it is right now. So what would your counsel be to everybody who is working in one way, shape or form within the alternative media, or is thinking about participating in some way in the alternative media?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a big question, Ian. But I think first of all, the term alternative media, that's going to have to get redefined or reshaped very soon, actually, because this term is maybe not reflecting completely the reality. So it almost ghettoizes this off the bat. I think maybe something along the lines of independent media or non-corporate media might be better, but independent surely. But it's a challenge as well, and I'm not going to be naive here. There's a lot of disinformation that's being pumped through what we might call alternative media outlets that are multi-million-dollar operations,
Absolutely.
meant to look like they're small independent operations, and many of them also that have very strong political connections, either to the left-wing establishment or the right-wing establishment. And I could name off some very big recognizable brands right now, but I don't want to get into that level of debate right now, critiquing the whole thing. But so it is important that people look for political affiliations, whether they be right-wing affiliations. So if you see an alternative media that's using the identical talking points as Fox News, for instance, you know that there are some very strong political links with that organization and the right-wing establishment, for instance. And the same with the left wing. And like many of George Soros's media projects, you can identify them very quickly, where their money's coming from by the foundations who back them. And we could even say in the mainstream media the same thing. I mean, I believe The Guardian gets quite a lot of money from the Scott Trust. So no one's asking, well, who's behind the Scott Trust? So that will affect and influence what you see and read in terms of editorial lines in The Guardian. But of course, that's a verboten subject in petty bourgeois circles, unfortunately. But these should be up for discussion. Everyone can get involved, even by having a social media account. A lot of people are using their Facebook pages as their blog now, which I think is cool because, well, they're already on a social network. So they're posting things that they like, giving comments, inviting people to comment. That's been very good. I mean, there's a lot going on, Ian. It's head spinning. I can't keep up with everything on a daily basis. It's impossible now. I probably felt I could a few years ago, but it's becoming more and more difficult now. So the best thing is we just focus what we do at 21st Century Wires. We just focus on what we do well, what we know well. We focus on that. We have become more of a niche website in that sense, and we try to do the best we can. And then we cross our fingers to hope that we can expand and have people on the team to help build the content on the website in the future. But until that day comes, it's a skeleton operation. But we feel like we have achieved a big impact on a number of major stories over the last couple of years, and we're grateful for being able to contribute that to the sort of wider effort to get people more politically aware, more aware of what's going on around them, and seeing through the fear and cutting through the establishment narratives with critical thinking.
Absolutely.
And common sense.
No, I would concur with you, and I think people perhaps sometimes think that as soon as they write a blog or put something up in Facebook, it's going to be seen by thousands of people, and of course that isn't the case. As we know very well, Facebook and YouTube have very advanced algorithms which can limit the distribution, even in terms of selecting the audience or preventing new audience from coming into it. So, I mean, it's a challenge on multiple fronts. But, even if somebody is reaching out to just a handful of people, even if it's just their immediate circle of friends, then, if that stimulates curiosity or it stimulates discussion, then it's all contributing to the rising of the awareness. Now, Patrick, before we've only got a few minutes, but I just want to make a couple of observations. I mean, we focused on Paris, and I just want to flag up the fact that, all eyes are being deliberately turned to Paris. And right now, we should be very concerned about what is going on elsewhere in the world, because this is the classic magician's trick. Yep. So, call it a hunch, but I would say that, what Israel is getting up to in Gaza and the West Bank right now is probably far worse than actually was perpetrated in Paris last Friday. And, of course, what Gaza has to put up with, and of course, as you rightly say, there was a massive explosion in Beirut just shortly before the event in Paris, and it hardly gets any column inches at all. And the level of atrocity here, of course, the average age, as we discussed with Max last week, the average age in the West Bank is just 17. And, something I came across as well earlier today was this outrageous campaign in Israel amongst the sniper community to target pregnant women. It was 1 bullet, 2 kills. And if you search for that in your search engine, you will find this outrageous campaign. They even had T-shirts printed in both English and in Hebrew. 1 bullet, 2 kills, with the target over a pregnant woman. This is the mentality that we're dealing with. So, let's make sure that we're not distracted by what's going on, however terrible those events may be. We got to keep looking at the bigger picture. Now,
quickly before we go, you might want to know, Ian, that 1 year ago, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, gave a warning to the French and said it's a grave mistake that the French Parliament have recognized the Palestinian state, along with several other European nations. But he said recognition of a Palestinian state by France would be a grave mistake, says Netanyahu 1 year ago. So this was kind of a warning. Do they have nothing better to do at a time of beheadings across Europe, including that of French citizens? He said angrily at the French. So I'm not saying, make of that what you will, but there's a lot going on in Israel now, and Israel doesn't like global scrutiny really on that situation. I believe they will do and say anything to distract the global media and the public away from that, because it's a very ugly scene there. The pogrom and the occupation, the apartheid state which they're running there, is a black mark on history. It's a black mark on humanity, quite frankly, that's being allowed to carry on for so many decades into the 21st century. We're supposed to be progressive by now. We're supposed to have gotten beyond apartheid by now, and yet there it is, festering right in the middle of everything.
Yeah, and more on that if you look at episode 55 or 6 or whatever it was last week with Max Egan, where we're discussing exactly that issue. Now, Patrick, we're out of time, but just before we do go, I want to make a reference to an event which you and 21st Century Wire are very much involved with, and that's going to be the first AV America event in Portland, Oregon, next April.
Nice picture.
Thank you. Yeah, that's Portland.
Yes.
It's a beautiful part of the US. So that's April 23rd, 24th. Dates for diary, particularly if you're stateside. The website will go live by the end of November of 2015. And the website will be www.avamerica.org or avamerica1.com. So we've got a great lineup of speakers, Patrick, I know, and you've contributed very much to this event. And I'm looking forward to partnering with you on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's going to be really good, I think.
I think so too. So Thanks, Patrick. Thanks very much for your insights. I know you've had a very busy weekend sharing your insights, and I'm sure you're going to be very busy over the next few weeks. And sadly, I think I can predict without much fear of any argument that what we've seen in Paris is not going to be the last event of this nature. But the more that we can scrutinize, the more that we can uncover the deception that's being perpetrated here, then the more people will reject the narrative being presented by the mainstream media. And as I've said, the alternative media has never been more important. And if you think that what I'm doing is worthy of your support, then please go to my website, ianrcrane.com. And if you want to either buy some product or make a donation, which you can do on the homepage there, all the revenues, all the donations go directly into supporting my work. So thanks very much for joining me tonight. And for those of you who follow me on Fracking Nightmare, I'll see you in 45 minutes.